Recording is in progress, and I can do something else here too. Well, I'm recording it. Okay, good evening. I'm going to do this again because we're recording this time, and I want to make sure we have this. And I'm going to be talking about outwitting your genes. And again, not your pants, but what makes you who you are. Yeah, your genes. Most people say, I was born this way. It runs in my family. My mom had it. My uncle had it. My cousin died from it. Everyone has it, so I know I'm going to get it. Now, before I had a short little segment about the difference being born with something and being born with a propensity to have something. Let me explain really quickly. I don't have a slide to show you that, but I'll explain it, and I hope that you could get the visual from the words that I use. Someone came to me recently, and a new patient of mine, and they said to me that I have high cholesterol. They said it runs in the family. She said everyone has it. She said my mom has it, my dad has it, my siblings have it, we all have it. Aunts, uncles, we all have it. She says, it runs in my family. Am I going to get it? That was the question. They came for actually diabetes. Now, what has been happening, I did a 8-week session on diabetes, and you get a lot of different questions. And this was one of the questions that came up in the middle of that discussion. And so I asked her when she was born, was she on medication to reduce her cholesterol? That's what I asked, and she just smiled at me. And so I repeated, I said, when you were born and they sent you home, did they send home medicine to reduce your cholesterol levels? She said, no. So I asked her, okay, when you were in elementary school, did you have to take medicine to reduce your cholesterol level? She again said no. I asked her when she was in middle school or high school, did she have to take medicine to reduce her cholesterol level? And she said no. And then I asked again, did you take it in college? She says no. I said, did you take it when you were in your late 20s and your 30s? She says no. And then I asked her, were you born with it? And she said to me, it runs in my family. My mother had it. My father had it. My siblings have it. Now, why did I ask her those questions about elementary school and high school? I wanted her to see that she really wasn't born with it. She was born with a propensity to get it, but she really wasn't born with it. And so I went back and I illustrated to her now using diabetes. I asked her the same thing. Did she have diabetes when she was born? She said, no. Did you have it when you were in elementary school? She said, no. I said, what about junior high school and high school? She says, no. I said, in your 20s, 30s? She says, no. And so I said, isn't that the same as with your quote unquote high cholesterol? She said, yes. She said, but it runs in my family. You see, it's one thing to have something run in your family and a totally different thing to actually have it. And this is very important because just because it's in your gene doesn't mean you will get it. But now, I want to make another statement. Some people are born with a congenital or something they are born with illness, meaning they are born and when they go home, they have to be on medication or have surgery because they were born that way. Type 1 diabetics, they are born that way. They didn't do anything other than to be born. Someone is born with a heart condition. They didn't do anything. They were just born. So if you're born with something, then we try to, or you could try to mitigate or ease the difficulties of having that malady. But if you're not born with something and then you would get it, then it's possible that you didn't have to get it at all. And this is what epigenetics is really all about. How do your genes express themselves? What causes it to happen or not to happen? And that's what we want to look at tonight. Now, I had a whole lot of slides, and I know I'm going to keep saying that because it's in my head. So these were the areas that I wanted to spend time with. DNA, chromosomes and genes, right? Epigenetics, you, your health, and you. Those were the four topics, and there were quite a few slides, but I don't have those slides. So I'm going to just go to each slide, and I have a few notes that I managed to put back up. And I want to discuss them so that we can understand their importance. So we're going to start at DNA, your DNA. Now, your DNA determines every inherited physical characteristic of every living thing. Your DNA. Okay? It doesn't matter your height, your width, your eye color, your DNA. That's what it does. It's going to determine what you're going to look like and even probably how you think. Your DNA. I tell a story. Well, I'll save the story for a minute, right? Now, the DNA is found inside almost every cell. A lot of viruses don't have DNA. Some have DNA. So DNA is found in almost every cell. Now, when we're talking about changing how your genes express themselves, by default, we're talking about changing you on a cellular level. Sounds crazy. How can I change something you were born with? Can it actually be done? We're going to take a look at that because this is important. Your DNA controls how the cells replicate and functions and what traits are inherited from previous generations. That's what your DNA does. They determine what can be seen, such as eye color, as well as what's not visible, your blood type, your inner workings. Your DNA determines those things. Now, exactly how it controls how you think, don't ask me that question. Neuropsychology or neuroscience is not my field of study, okay? But it goes along to tell you how you reason. Those are the things that we cannot see. Your DNA is involved in that. Sometimes you might hear someone say, is it nature, the way you were born, or nurture, you learned it or learnt it? Your DNA is very important. Now, to my story, I tell this story to illustrate this point. I didn't grow up with my father. Okay, I'm 38 years old when I meet my father. So there's no way I'm learning from him, as I'm growing. Because whether or not you know it or not, you learn from your parents. And it's not like they say, okay, get a pencil and write this down. No, that's not really how you learn. You learn by observing. You learn by watching how they respond to mistakes. You learn by how they come into a situation and how they leave a situation. You learn by how they keep their home or don't keep their home. You learn by how they worship or don't worship, but no one is telling you write it down. You learn these things just because you're in that environment, okay? Nurture, that's what nurture means. You're learning from your environment. Then you have nature, the things that you do automatically, the way you cough. When I'm tired, for many years, I didn't know what this was. I would get tired. I've always been one of those, I might say a workaholic or something, or a studyaholic, or whatever I'm going to do it till it's done. And so I might be up for days trying to solve something. And it's not uncommon. I'll start on Monday and I'm going to stay up till Wednesday, right? But when Wednesday comes, Wednesday night, I would develop a terrible cough. If you today, you might think I had COVID or something like that. Coughing, just hacking, just cannot stop. Cough medicine will not work. Couldn't figure it out for years. One day I called my oldest sister, my eldest sister, because she's the oldest of all of us. And I was coughing. And she says to me, "You sound like your father." I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, you didn't get enough sleep." I said, "Yes, I didn't sleep." He says, "Well, yeah, that's what your father does." I said, "What?" She says, "Yes." She says, "When he doesn't sleep, he coughs like that." And so I called my brother to tell him, "Do you do this?" And he says, "Yes, I do it too." And I was blown away. It was in my genes. And we never knew what it was, where it came from, but now we did. It was in our genes. And it wasn't something that we practiced doing. It was because the genes carry who you are moving forward. Now, it could be a good thing or a bad thing. It could be a bad thing if the trait that it brings is detrimental to your health, right? Meaning, in my family runs high blood pressure and heart disease. It's in my family. Uh-oh, you know? So it could be a good thing that if in your family runs longevity of life. Oh, that's great. I can live long. But why is it that even though you might have long livers in your family, right? Long life, some of them die early, even though on a broader sense, some die late. Why is it that some of them die from heart disease and a few don't even get it? That's the question. And that's what we're going to look at this evening. Epigenetics. Okay. Then we have chromosomes. This is a little blurred up. I tried to separate it, didn't have much time. Now, chromosomes are within the cells. Your DNA and various proteins are organized into this dense unit called chromosomes. Now, the chromosomes is how the body is going to move this DNA into its offspring. You know, the chromosomes carry the hereditary information from one generation to the next in a form of what we call genes. A chromosome is made up of protein and DNA, of course, which is the substance which determines an organism's inherited traits, color of your eyes, the height, your weight, all that kind of stuff. Chromosomes. Now, where do you get your chromosomes from? Well, you get them from your parents. Now, does anyone know how many pairs of chromosomes a person has, or how many chromosomes a person has?
23.
23.
23 what? Chromosomes or pairs of chromosomes?
Pairs.
Pairs. Yeah, pairs. Total of 46. So when your parents come together to form a new child, you get 23 from mom, 23 from dad, come together to make new offspring. Now, this is interesting because you're never 100% like your dad and you're never 100% like your mom. But sometimes you see someone who looks more like his dad, walks more like his dad, and looks nothing like the mother. Or you might find someone who looks just like the mother and nothing like the dad, although they got 23 from the dad and 23 from the mom. Now, the reason sometimes that happens is because of how the genes or the chromosomes were attached to those 23, depends on how the DNA will attach to those 23 chromosomes. They might have been attached as a recessive gene rather than a dominant gene. And so when the 23 from mom comes with the 23 from dad, you get recessive from dad and dominance from mom. They look more like mom. And what's also interesting, because you're never 100% like your parents, it's possible to be more related to your siblings than it is to your parents. And this is why often when a child is sick and they need to get matching blood or something, a kidney transplant, they go to his siblings, because the two sets of chromosomes came to make a particular new strand of a gene pool, should we say. So chromosomes, 23 from your mother, 23 from your dad. But because of that, don't think that you might look more like one or the other. Sometimes you look like none of them, because you got recessive genes from your mom, recessive genes from your dad, but you got in those genes, you were dominant grandfather, dominant grandmother, and you look more like your grandparents. And I don't really have time to get into exactly how that works because it'll just take too much time. But yes, so our traits are passed down through DNA into the chromosomes, through the genes, into you, the individual. Chromosomes, genes, they are the smallest units of heredity that is passed from parent to its offspring. Gene, okay? That's the smallest piece. That's the details on the smallest piece. It's found inside of every cell. They carry the information that determines the characteristics or traits of the living thing. Genes. Genes achieve their effects by directing the synthesis or production of protein. Now, this is very important. How does it get me to look like my parent? How does it get me to have the same heart condition as my parent, or medical situation as my parent? It is because the gene is going to tell the body how to produce proteins. And those are what tells the organism who it is or gives it character. Now, this is the key. The key is in that fact that the genes are telling information to the body, and that information is make it this way. Now, if you can change the message that the genes is relaying, you can change the outcome. That is epigenetics. The environment, your diet, how you worship, all can play a part in telling your genes how to create a protein which is going to impact how the person is. Now, that sounds crazy. I mean, when you think about it, this is something external, changing something inside of the cell. Is that really possible? Is it possible that although down through hundreds of years, my family all had heart disease, and you tell me that I could do something today that will change the way my genes expresses itself? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Now, I don't want to go to the next slide yet. Now, here goes why this is important. There was a report that you could go look it up on the internet, right? I'll tell you that right now, which might be the best thing. If you go on the internet and you look up The Blue Zone by National Geographic, you're going to discover that the Seventh-day Adventists who practice, right, the lifestyle that the church was founded on, improved their health and lived longer, reduced their risk of disease that ran in their family for centuries. It was the only of the groups in the blue zone that was actually growing while the other groups were shrinking. It was the only group that a person, although he had terrible genes, entered into and expanded his life. The world really didn't know much about that in the 50s and 60s and even in the 40s when they began to look at Seventh-day Adventists. They didn't have a clue what was happening. But someone discovered epigenetics. And they realized that your environment and the decisions that you made today are going to instruct your genes how to produce protein that will change the characteristics of that individual. This is very important. So now I think the video that I wanted us to watch is going to come on. Let's see. Yes.
Imagine coming into the
Can
world
everyone
with a
hear?
person so like yourself that for a time you don't understand mirrors.
As a child, when I looked in the mirror, I'd say, "That's my sister." And my mother would say, "No, that's your reflection."
Hardly surprising, because you both come from the same egg, have precisely the same genes, and you're literally clones, better known as identical twins. It's not uncommon for a twin like Anna Marie to get diagnosed with cancer, while the other, like Clotilde, doesn't. So alike, be so unalike. These mice may hold a clue. Their DNA is as identical as Anna Marie and Clotilde's, despite the differences in their color and size. The human who studies them is the university's Randy Journal. So Randy, I see here you have skinny mice and fat mice. What have you done in this lab?
Well, these animals are actually genetically identical.
The fat ones and the skinny ones.
That's correct.
This gets even more mysterious when you realize that these identical mice both have a particular gene called a goody. But in the yellow mouse, it stays on all the time, causing obesity. So what accounts for the thin mouse? A tiny chemical tag of carbon and hydrogen called a methyl group has affixed to the agouti gene, shutting it down. Features possess millions of tags like these. Some, like methyl groups, attach to genes directly, inhibiting their function. Other types grab the proteins, called histones, around which genes coil, and tighten or loosen them to control gene expression. Methylation and histone patterns exist in every cell, constituting a sort of second genome.
Epigenetics literally translates into just meaning above the genome. So if you would think, for example, of the genome as being like a computer, the hardware of a computer, the epigenome would be like the software that tells the computer when to work, how to work, and how much.
In fact, it's the epigenome that tells our cells what sort of cells they should be. Skin, hair, heart. You see, all these cells have the same genes, but their epigenomes silence the unneeded ones to make cells different from one another. Epigenetic instructions pass on as cells divide, but they're not necessarily permanent. Researchers think they can change. And that brings us to the reason why we're showing you twins. In 2005, they participated in a groundbreaking study in Madrid. Its aim? To show just how identical epigenetically they are or aren't.
Our genes are just part of the story. Something has to regulate these genes. And part of the explanation is epigenetics.
Stellar wanted to see if the twins' epigenome might account for their differences. Yeah. Cells from 40 pairs of identical twins, aged 3 to 74. Then laborious process of dissolving the cells until all that was left were wispy strands of DNA, the master molecule that contains our genes. Researchers amplified fragments of the DNA until the genes themselves became detectable. Those that had been turned off epigenetically appear as dark pink bands on the gel. Now, the genes from a pair of twins are cut out and overlapped. The results are far from subtle, especially when you compare the epigenomes of two sets of twins that differ in age. Here on the left is the overlapped DNA of 6-year-old Javier and Carlos. The yellow indicates where their gene expression is identical. On the right is the DNA of 66-year-old Anna Marie and Clotilde. In contrast to younger twins, hardly any yellow shines through. Their epigenomes have changed dramatically. The study suggests that as twins age, epigenetic differences accumulate, especially when their lifestyles differ.
One of the main findings of research is that epigenomes can change in function of what we eat, of what we smoke, of what we drink. And this is one of the key differences between epigenetics and genetics.
I hope everybody saw that. The key here, they examining identical twins. Now, identical twins are identical in every way. And if you understand how they are created, it's the exact same egg and sperm that produces this individual. They're identical. If you took their thumbprint, identical. If you scan their eyeballs, retina, identical. You took their blood type, identical. There's no way of telling them apart. But what's interesting about epigenetics, it begins to show why one twin, in this case, would get cancer, or someone will get heart disease and the other one would not. And identical twins are what you want to study, because then it's not something different internally, it's something that's happening externally that's making the difference. So when you examine identical twins and you begin to look at their lifestyles, you begin to say, look what happened when they did this, or ate this way, or lived this way. So what does this have to do with our health? That's ultimately the question. What does it have to do with outwitting or outsmarting our genes? And it has everything to do with it. Everything to do with it. You see, many do not value the lifestyle and the diet of Seventh-day Adventists. They don't see the point. They don't see what the big deal is. But epigenetics tells us what the big deal is. You see, and the finding in the blue zone reveals and proves that it is true. You see, when you rest the way God says, when you get sunlight and exercise, when your diet is changed, all of those things, those 8 laws we talk about, right? So you do it this way, 8 laws, they actually play a part in telling our genes how to be expressed. So like those 2 mouse in this video, they had a condition called agouti genes. And what agouti does, it makes you fat and overweight, and it shortens your life. And it is so profound that it changes the way you physically look. So you'd have never thought that those 2 mice were identical, but they were identical. But you said, how is that possible? One was fat and yellow and one was skinny and brown. It was because of the diet that they fed those rats, or mice, to be correct. The diet told the genes to express itself differently. Now, when you change your diet and your lifestyle, you actually turn off about 480, I think 83 bad cells in your body just by changing your diet and getting adequate rest. Now, imagine what that does internally to you. It will help in so many different categories. Now, I'll try to memorize them all, but I just don't. I wouldn't be able to memorize them. And that's why I'm a little disappointed in myself this evening. But they will turn off all these bad cells or proteins that you have that attach to your cells. Those proteins trigger heart disease, obesity, kidney problems, diabetes type 4, brain, or Alzheimer's type, diabetes type 4, all are triggered by those proteins. So when God tells us that this is what I want you to eat, that's what Genesis was all about. It was because God understood epigenetics before man discovered it. You see, science doesn't make news. Science actually details what God has made or what God has done. And so God, looking down into our day, knew what would be the condition of men. He knew that our diets would be very important for us. And he knew that if we followed his principles, we could turn off all of those negative things that impact our life. I had another video, but I didn't manage to save that video because, as I said before, the machine shut down in the middle of it. But you can find this video if you put on epigenetics and just put video. This was a very simple video, and the video showed the impact that smog had on a person's life. And actually on the gene level, on the cellular level, it showed how worry impacted the cellular level of the individual. It showed how sunlight, and this is not by Seventh-day Adventists, right? It showed how rest, how food impacted the individual on a cellular level. Because that's where we need the change to be. Because, as I said, we were born with these genes we got from our parents. We had absolutely no control over that. None at all. We didn't ask for them, and we couldn't reject them. But God had a way of overriding. One of the scientists in this video said something which was very important. He talked about the genome and how epigenetics actually works. It was an override to the genes. So the genes are expressing themselves, be tall, get diabetes, get heart disease. But you can override that message by following God's principles of health. And now, instead of the genes producing these proteins that would make a person ill, the message would be, make him strong, make him well, give them more life. And so this is the importance of the China study. This was the importance of the Blue Zone study, because it proved that we could turn on and turn off health. Now, let me back up for a moment, because I mentioned this topic that I did not discuss, which was the China study. The China study discovered something totally by accident. There was a group of scientists who were studying the Chinese because they were amazed that in a country where they didn't really have an EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, where pollution was so terrible, right? So terrible that they had smog alerts. You couldn't see down the street because pollution was so thick, where the water was contaminated. Contaminated water, polluted air, polluted food, and making it worse, the people chain smoked cigarettes. They were studying the place because the people didn't have cancer. Cancer wasn't dominant. How was that possible? You know, when I grew up here in America, it was interesting. When you went on the bus, people were smoking on the bus. If you got into a plane, they were smoking in the plane. You went to the store, they were smoking. And I didn't know anyone who had cancer except for a couple of people. They were usually the wealthy people. They had cancer. We used to call it the rich man's disease because we didn't have cancer in my neighborhood. And I remember on Wednesday, every second month, my street was dark because we had a coal burning furnace in the building that I live in. And when they came every second Wednesday, they'll put the heat on and all the smog would come down and on the street and we'll just get ash on us and soot. But I knew no one who had cancer. Today, they want to stop fossil fuel. They shut down most coal plants. You can't smoke on a plane. You can't smoke in public places. You have no smoking. And guess what? More people with cancer than ever before. That's why they were studying the group in China. In the middle of all these carcinogens, the people didn't get cancer. And then lo and behold, one day, amazing thing happened. They noticed that the report started to show prevalence of cancer in certain districts. And the numbers were alarming. So they went to those districts to see why did they all of a sudden start to get cancer and the people in the other districts that were just as polluted did not get cancer. They discovered that in the district with the high rates of cancer, the people were eating animal products. The scientist says, huh? So they did an experiment again on mice. They gave them animal products, that's meat, fish, that's animal, the fish, just in case someone doesn't know that. An animal, no, yeah, fish is an animal. They gave the animals, the mice, fish, meat, and the mice got cancer. And then they stopped feeding them meat and fish, and the cancer went away. So they wondered, is this true? And they began to do research. And they examined World War II. And they discovered that when Hitler was moving his army, blitzkrieg, really quickly, they would confiscate all the animals in certain regions to feed the army. The scientists discovered that in those regions, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, vascular disease all fell. And it stayed that way until the war was over. And after the war was over, the people got their animals back, started to eat, and the cancer came back, high blood pressure came back, diabetes came back. They wrote it in a book called China Study. You can buy it in the store, it's still available. And you can look at the research itself. What did they discover? Epigenetics. The food can change your body on a cellular level. Stress can change your body on a cellular level. Forgiveness and how you worship can change your body on a cellular level. The importance of epigenetics is that it will give you better quality of life, regardless of what your genes said you should have had. Because epigenetics supersedes, or as we saw, is above the way your genes express themselves. And remember how genes work. They send a signal to say, create this protein. Epigenetics change the message that goes from the gene. And this is how things are different. And so tonight, I hope we get that point. I wanted to do this because it's of such great importance. And we don't respect it enough. And I think sometimes because I don't think we value God, we value science. So the science says it. I'm watching in America, everyone becoming vegetarian. They have vegetarian shops all over the place. When I was doing my research, I remember being in the Midwest, couldn't find anything to eat. Now they have vegan places in the Midwest because the science has said it. But we have had something far greater than science. We had the ones who created us. And he tells us there in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 29, right? That's what he says. He says something. He says, and God said, behold, I mean, stop, look, pause, listen. I have given you every herb bearing seed. That's God speaking. That's what he said. He says, which is upon the face of the earth. I don't care where you live. It grows everywhere. And every tree in which the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat or food. God understood you better than you understood yourself. He is the creator. And he gave the remedy for the problems that we are seeing in the world today. Now, I know that's hard for people to grasp because we like what we like. And we can't see how something as simple as a diet change, a lifestyle change, an environmental change can make a difference in our health. But you don't have to see it. You can find it on the internet and you'll see it there. You can look up epigenetic studies and you'll see it proven there by scientist after scientist. You go to the Blue Zone study and you'll see it happening there. The question is, do you believe God? Do you believe God? So gaining the victory over your health, believe that you can do all things. Yeah, even break the addiction to certain lifestyles, the addiction to certain foods. I know people say, oh, I just like, no, you can do all things if you believe God. Changing your diet is a question of whether or not you believe God. You know, before I got on, my wife and I, we were having worship. We were bringing in the Sabbath. And we were had been looking at the story of Jonah. And I challenge people to go and look at chapter 2 and chapter 3. Because they juxtapose Jonah versus, actually 3 and 4. Jonah versus the people of Nineveh. It said that the people of Nineveh believed God. And it doesn't say that Jonah did. It said that the people of Nineveh worshiped God, and it said Jonah only worshiped because he was in the bottom of the sea. We see people who are saved, the people of Nineveh, and a man who's saying to God, kill me because you're too merciful. Let us not be like Jonah. Let us believe God. And God said, I have a diet for you that now science has proven that if you follow God's diet and God's lifestyle, you could change what your genes are saying you should be. So you must believe that you could do all things. That's what Philippians 4:13. Believe that God works in you to will and to do. You know, we like these verses. They sound great. But I'm a person, words don't mean much. Let me change my thinking cap for a moment, my presentation for a moment. Let me put on another hat. I pastored for many years. And one thing I didn't do, I didn't make long appeals. I've been to churches and I worked these guys appeal for 3 days. If you have to beg them to come, they didn't come because they wanted to come. That's my philosophy. That's how it works. If you believe something, you'll do it. If I have to beg you, you didn't want to do it. I'm appealing to emotions now. No. God didn't say appeal to emotions. God says, come, let's reason together. So either you believe or you don't believe. Don't deceive yourself. Never do that. It's not a good thing in the end. If you believe God, then believe him all the way and get the benefit of God all the way. I have food that's going to make you well and strong. Believe him or not. Choice is yours. I can't make you believe. Believe that God could work in you to will and to do. You say, I'm weak. I can't do this. That's what you say. Oh, no, this is difficult. I've been doing this all my life. Yeah, you can't do it. And I agree with you. You can't. But that's exactly why we believe God. For it is God that works in you both to will and to do. That's what God says. I work in you. Not that you work in you. I work in you. Because I know the challenge is too great. I know you're addicted to this lifestyle. I know you're addicted to this food. So I can't trust you to break the habit. But I can work in you if you believe me. Yeah. Some of us need victory over health. Like I said, I just did an 8-week presentation study. Everybody got the awards on diabetes. And I can always tell those who believe and those who are just attending. And the reason I can tell, because 3 weeks into the presentation, someone is going to come to that door screaming and yelling, I can't believe, my glucose is down. I've lost weight. And the other ones are looking like, how did that happen? Because they believed. The next thing that we have to do here, because we know it's a struggle, believe that God is able. Yeah, believe that God is able. I was thinking about what's impossible for men. No. We got to believe that God is able. Now unto him that's able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that what we can ask or think. Now, somewhere on the internet, even my Facebook page, I have a picture there. I think it was 2007 thereabouts. I decided that I was going to get on my bicycle and go from New York City to California. So I got on my bicycle and I began to pedal. And I reached. When I got there, I went to the Pacific Ocean. I parked my bike, put my camera, and I worshiped right there at the beach. And this text is the text that I use. Now unto him that is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that I can ask or think. I chose that text because people said you can never do that. It's too hard. How are you going to make it? What happens if you get a flat tire? Where are you going to sleep? All that kind of business. You're a black man. You can't be riding across the country like that. I did it anyway because God is able. So we must believe that God is able. And I know some of us want to get better health. We want to get off some of the meds that we've been on. But we find ourselves keep going back to this diet. We must believe that God is able, that he can work in you, the individual. And then we must change the way we think. Ooh, yes, we must change the way we think. For as he thinks in his heart, that's Proverbs 23, verse 7, so is he. And it goes on to say, eat and drink, says he. Right? Just eat and drink. We have to change the way we think about living. Again, I want to go back to this evening when we were having worship here. And I was saying, many of us are so fascinated with this life. I was in Florida. When I was in Florida, I kept hearing this, have some fun. Go out, have some fun. Just do it once. You only live once. Do you know that's not true? The only person who only lives once is the man that you call a sinner. The man who has accepted Christ lives twice. He gets his 70 plus 10, 70 years, and he dies. But because he believed God, he gets another life that has no ending. We must decide which life we're living for. Is it this life or the life to come? So we must change the way we think. So we must believe that God can do all things. We must believe that God works in me who is struggling with my diet, with my rest. I must believe that God is able to change the way I eat, change my situation, and I must now begin to think positive. God is able to do those very things. Then what do I do after that? Because this is crucial. I could change my way I think. I could do all that things, but I need to do something beyond just think. All right? I need to cry to the Lord. Thursday night, I have a study with a group of people, and they're not all Seventh-day Adventists. And sometimes we have this discussion about the law and grace and all that stuff. And it says, look, the Bible said that the law was a schoolmaster to bring us to the master. And after that, we don't need the law. I said, well, you have a point. I said, but you'll never get to the master if you don't keep the law. Because that's what the law does. It brings me to the master. So if you throw away the law, how do I get to him? And so now that I say I am a follower of Christ, I need to get to the master. Then they cried unto the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them out of their distress. God wants to save you out of your distress, the distress of poor health. He wants to save you out of distress of going back and forth with diet and not resting and environmental and stress and not forgiving. But you can only get salvation if you go to him, if you cry to him. Yeah, you must go to him and say, Lord, I'm struggling with believing in you. The Bible tells a story of a man, his son, having issues. And he brings the son to the disciples, and the disciples couldn't help him. And then he finally brings the son to Christ. And the question is, do you believe? And the man says, I believe, but help my unbelief. Some of us believe that way. We believe, but in the back of that, there's some unbelief. And so what happens? We wind up stifling God's ability to help us. We wind up not being able to break free of the very thing that we're trying to escape from. Whether it is health or our spiritual lives, we find ourselves stuck because we need help with our belief. And we haven't gone and cried to the Lord because we think we're already there. Because, I go to church and stuff like that. But the fact that we're struggling with things that we can gain the victory over tells us that we need to change to really cry to the Lord. And why do we cry to him? Psalms 107, verse 20, one of my favorite verses. It says that when we cry, he sent his word and he healed them. Healed them and delivered them from their destruction. See, healing begins with God. Healing begins in accepting God. Healing begins in saying, Lord, I give up my right to know better or to be right. So it doesn't really matter what the malady is. Now, those that you're born with, when I went home from the doctor, they gave my parents medicine because I'm born that way. Came home from the doctor and I was diabetic, or might have some other chronic disease that I was born that way. Yes, we try to mitigate that, and God gives you the strength to deal with that. But when you develop it over life, those are lifestyle issues. And God wants to give us the victory over those lifestyle issues. What we learned tonight is, anyone remembers the term? Epigenetics. And what epigenetics basically is the way that we cause our genes to express themselves differently by turning off all of these negative things that happen cellularly and turning on the power that God gave us to be well. Epigenetics. Scientists has given it that term, but I'm going to give it the term known as obedience to the will and way of God. Because God tells us how to live. He tells us what to eat. He tells us when to worship. He tells us how to live our lives. And these external things, if we follow God, will impact us on a cellular level. And then we could join the blue zone, where scientists have discovered what God has done by giving his people 10, 50 more years worth of life. That's why we're here. And it's in living that life, right? It's in living that life that we prove to the world the power of God. So God wants to prove to the world of his power 2023. And you can do that. You can make a decision to follow God. You can make a decision to take him at his word, to believe that he can do all things, that he can work in you, that he's able, that you can change the way you think, that he can heal you of your disease, and then live that new life in the presence of those around you and see what happens. They'll come to give God glory, as Jesus said in Matthew 5:16. So tonight, I am thankful for the opportunity to present you this topic on epigenetics. You could do more research on it, and you could see how much I missed of how powerful this topic is. Again, God has given us this tool so that you and I do not have to be ill just because our genes said so. We can actually gain the victory over ourselves. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, I am so thankful for this opportunity. I'm thankful because you have made us so wonderfully. You knew what was coming, and you gave us the tools to gain the victory over it. I pray that we will be obedient, that we will use your words and your laws to bring us to you so that you can magnify yourselves in us. This Sabbath night, Lord, as we prepare to rest, I pray that we will rest in the comfort of all that we call God, not just for shelter, not just for relationships that we have, but the God that says, I am your healer. Help us to claim those promises, live by the instructions, and prove in our lives of how good you really are. Thank you for tonight. Thank you for this opportunity, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Alrighty, folks, that's the presentation, short slides, the slides I can remember. I'm going to stop the recording.